Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on Ukraine. Just within the next several hours, both the Russian and the Ukrainian drones will cross the border between Russia and Ukraine, and we'll start watching first massive attacks after the May ceasefire. Most likely the parties are not going to extend this current ceasefire, and most likely clashes will continue. At least Zelensky stated today that not Zelensky, but Zelensky's secretary stated that Zelensky is ready to talk with Putin if Russia is truly ready for serious dialogue. So the Zelensky's secretary didn't clarify what exactly is serious dialogue, but most likely serious dialogue is something that is built on the terms of Ukraine and Zelensky himself personally. For example, if you remember, during the May holidays, the president of the Russian Federation stated that Russia thinks that former German Chancellor Schröder could be a very good person to be a negotiator for dialogue between Russia and Europe, and could be, let's say, acceptable representative of the European Union. But today we received the official report from the Ukrainian side that the Ukrainians don't agree with this situation. Ukraine does not support the candidacy of former German Chancellor Schröder as a negotiator with the Russian on behalf of the European Union, said the head of the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Sybiga. So this is exactly what serious dialogue means according to the Ukrainian side. Only if everything fits the Ukrainian requirements can be considered as a serious dialogue. If anything doesn't fit the Ukrainians, let's say, requirements, then this most likely will be not something like a serious dialogue, which obviously will be never accepted by the Russian side. Furthermore, we received a report that peace talks on Ukraine are dead, according to the New York Times. US-backed peace talks have effectively reached a dead end, and Kiev is relying on its own production of weapons and drones. This is a very important thing. There are no more real negotiations. Russia has no incentive to do so now, and the United States no longer appears to be a credible and reasonable mediator between two sides. Kiev is distancing itself from the United States and openly seeking support from other countries. Nevertheless, analysts believe that replacing American intelligence will be the most difficult task. First of all, we're talking about satellite intelligence. Kiev also vitally needs American Patriot air defense systems to defend itself against Russian ballistic missiles. But we know that the Ukrainians are trying to find a solution how to start building with their own sources to build missiles, drones, and so on. And if you remember, during the previous video, we were talking that the Minister of Defense of Germany, Pistorius, arrived in Kiev on an announced visit to strengthen cooperation within the strategic partnership. And later we received the report that Ukraine and Germany have agreed to launch joint production of long-range drones with a flight range of up to 1,500 kilometers, according to German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. And of course, the simple question is, why do you need to produce 1,500 drones if you are going to sign an agreement? Of course, if you are not going to sign any peace agreement, of course, first of all, you would try to test these drones in war with the Russian Federation. And most likely this is exactly what is going to happen within the next months, years of the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. And you know that these days we receive lots of updates about Germany, about the situation. For example, another interesting report that Germany and Canada are starting a joint program to create attack submarines for operations in the Arctic. So I'm just trying to tell you that Germany made its choice. For example, if we increase the numbers of updates, let's say from the beginning of April, and during the April of 2026 and the first 10 days of May, we were receiving updates about Germany about things that the situation with the economy is very, very bad, about political crisis, about things that major companies, car production companies, reduce the number of employees. For example, Volkswagen is cutting production worldwide. We had report that German car makers, Mercedes-Benz, reported a 17.2% drop. So we received lots of updates about huge economical crisis in Germany. And as we understand, Germany found its path, and according to information we have, according to media, Germany is going to invest everything they have into military. And as we discussed, they're planning to produce weapons with Ukraine, they're planning to produce weapons with Canada, and they're planning to start the massive buildup. Of course, we understand that this is not just about Russia. Of course, this is also about Poland, which is going to create one of the most powerful army in the Europe by 2030, which means that Germany wants to compete this army as well. And another important update on this matter is coming from Romania. Today, according to information we have, Rheinmetall, also a German company, and the Swiss shipping company announced they are in talks to jointly acquire the bankrupt Mangalia shipyard in Romania. Under the guise of civilian projects, the yard will manufacture military products. Specifically, the Romanian government is already proposed to build multi-purpose patrol vessels and two diver support vessels in this shipyard. So just according to everything we have just discussed, Germany is planning to increase its influence in the area of the Black Sea by production, most likely Navy drones and patrol drones on the territory of Romania. Furthermore, Germany is going to increase its influence on the territory of Ukraine by production long-range drones with the Ukrainian side, and Germany together with Canada are going to increase their influence in the Arctic region and also to confront and to compete the Russians. So this is the most important thing, but the question is not about these plans that Germany currently has. The most important thing is whether the Russians are going to allow Germany to do all these things, because we had reports about this, that the Russians are keeping an eye on this situation. And probably today we received an answer to this situation, to this my question, and the answer came not from the Kremlin itself, but from the Republic of Belarus, the closest ally of the Russian Federation. Today, the president of Belarus stated that they threw bombs and missiles, and what did they win? The Belarusian president asserts that it is impossible to win a modern war without a ground operation. He said that this is at a meeting on state weapons program and called for the army to be prepared for such operations. So obviously, and one thing is clear, that if the Russians or the Russian Federation don't want to allow the Europeans to improve themselves in the military means, the only way to do this is to finish the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and probably the conflict will escalate, but not escalate like, let's say, to get to another layer, but to finish and as soon as possible. At the same time, Europe suffers huge problems, and currently the problems are coming from the United Kingdom, where the party of Keir Starmer was defeated completely during the local elections. And during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates on this matter. Different deputies, different politicals were calling for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer to resign following the speech and following the elections. But according to information we have, Keir Starmer is not going to do this, despite the fact that most of the experts stated that he will do this by the end of this week. At the same time, he stated that at the next European Union summit, so he sees himself at the next European Union summit, I will set a new direction for Britain. The last government was defined by breaking our relationship with Europe. This Labour government will be defined by rebuilding our relationships with Europe, by putting Britain at the heart of Europe. So he's trying to find a solution how to save his post, his position, and telling the truth, very difficult to believe that it is possible, but who knows what can happen during the upcoming weeks and days. Furthermore, during the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, of course, some sort of scandal can allow him to save his position at least for a while. And of course, as the conflict on the territory of Ukraine itself, during the previous days, both the Russians and the Ukrainians were keeping and were sticking to the ceasefire that was announced by the United States of America several days ago. But despite this situation, we see that by the end of the 11th of May of 2026, we start receiving more updates from the sources on the ground that the clashes step by step but are intensifying. We start receiving more videos of artillery strikes, air strikes, which means that despite the fact that both the Russians and the Ukrainians say that they try to save the ceasefire for as long as possible, we see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians intensify their attacks on each other. And once again, as we discussed at the beginning of this video, most likely right after the 12th of May of 2026 comes, most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians will begin attacking each other with everything they have. Especially with drones and with missiles, because both the Russians and the Ukrainians during these days managed to accumulate significant number of drones and missiles ready to launch in the direction of each other. And of course, as we discussed during the previous videos, the most important battles are going to take place in the area of the city of Zaporizhzhia, where the Ukrainians during the previous days were successfully counterattacking and forcing the Russians to fall back. But at the same time, we received the report from Ukrainian media that the Russians are finishing regrouping, and obviously 3 days is enough to finish regrouping and to begin the Western Zaporizhzhia counteroffensive, probably with the purpose even to enter the southern parts of the city itself. Telling the truth, I don't even know what should we expect from the 12th of May of 2026, but it seems, and something tells me, that we might see some surprises from the Russian side and of course from the Ukrainian. As for the Konstantinovka Slaviansk direction, the Russians before the beginning of the May ceasefire managed to improve their positions significantly through the city of Konstantinovka, and up to 30% were already captured by Russians, and obviously tomorrow the Russians will continue their offensives with the purpose to establish complete control over the city. As for the city of Slaviansk, the Russians threatened the city from the north, from the bridgehead the Russians managed to create before ceasefire started between the villages of Titianovka and Prishep. But you know, that's a very interesting situation that the Russians stated that the Ukrainians in this area didn't follow the ceasefire established by Russians and the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians during the previous days were counterattacking Russians in this area with the purpose to recapture these positions. And the Russian sources that Ukrainians suffered huge losses. Furthermore, the Russians will continue their pressure in the direction of the settlement of Nikolaevka with the purpose to finish the battle for the pockets, for the Nikolaevka pockets between the river of Seversky Donetsk and Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. This is a very important territory right in front of the cities of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk before the beginning of a major battle for these territories. So this summer is going to be very hot, but we see that despite the fact that the summer is going to be very hot, we see that both the Russians, the Ukrainians, and of course the Europeans are preparing themselves before the beginning of talks that most likely are going to take place somewhere, are going to start somewhere in November and will last almost till February of 2027. Meanwhile, the United States of America is trying to quit or to finish the situation, this bad situation that is currently taking place in the Middle East. The United States of America, according to different experts, doesn't know how to quit the conflict with minimal losses and, of course, if it's possible, with the greatest victory. And it seems that the United States of America, more precisely the President of the United States of America, will try to go to China with the purpose to talk about this with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Before this meeting, President Trump stated that President Xi is a good and smart man. He loves China. Furthermore, he said that, and according to different media, Trump is expected to confront Xi Jinping this week over China's support for Iran, including oil purchases and possible weapons exports, according to senior U.S. officials. The two leaders will meet Thursday and Friday in Beijing, amid tensions over trade, Taiwan, artificial intelligence, and the U.S.-Israel conflict with Iran. So as you can see, most likely Trump and Xi Jinping won't pay significant attention to the conflict in Ukraine, probably trying to give this conflict in hands of Russians and the Europeans, if they are able to find a solution, first how to meet each other before making any decisive conclusions. U.S. intelligence says Beijing has considered shipping air defense systems to Iran via other countries to mask its involvement. President Trump is expected to confront Xi Jinping during this summer in Beijing this week over claims that China is selling weapons to Iran. This is a very important statement because I would like to remind you that, according to information we have, the President of the United States of America has rejected the latest proposal that was published by the Iranian side, which means that the only way right now for the United States of America to finish this situation, either to continue doing what they're doing right now, is complete blockades of the Persian Gulf, but this is time and frozen assets in the area of the Middle East, and the second option is operation using military means. But to force the Iranians to accept U.S. demands using military means, you need to involve probably even troops and more weapons and so on. And obviously, and everybody understands right now that the next phase of the conflict between Iran and the United States of America won't be similar to the conflict we used to see in February and March, because most likely Iran will have air defense forces, air defense systems, and most likely the coalition will suffer more losses in comparison with the previous phase. China is waiting for the President of the United States of America. The Chinese Foreign Minister confirmed Donald Trump's state visit to the country from May 13th to 15th, and the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. U.S. President Donald Trump will pay a state visit to China from May 13 to 15. By the way, today the Russians once again remind the U.S. officials and the President of the United States of America that the Russians also wait for the President of the United States of America on the territory of Moscow, and most likely it will happen. Currently very difficult to understand why, because now, according to a mirroring of diplomatic actions, due to the fact that the president of Russia visited Alaska the previous year, now the president of the United States of America must visit some territory of Russia. Maybe this is going to happen somewhere in Kurily or in the area in the eastern parts of Russia along the border with China, maybe somewhere here, who knows, but most likely this will happen in coming month, maybe before the end of the conflict in Ukraine, if it happens this year. And meanwhile, we see that the Israeli forces continue intensifying their operation, buffer zone operation in the southern parts of Lebanon, because first we continued receiving changes on the ground from different sources, and during the previous days, weeks, the Israeli Defense Forces managed to improve their position significantly, and as we discussed, the Israeli Defense Forces managed to cross the river of Litani in the southern parts of Lebanon, and we start receiving updates about bombardments of the settlements of Nabatih, Zebdin, which are located to the north of the river, which means that the Israeli Defense Forces are trying to create a buffer zone between the central part of Lebanon and the river of Litani itself. Furthermore, we start receiving many videos from the Hezbollah sides of FPV drone attacks and strikes on the Israeli Defense Forces that are trying to improve their positions in this part of Lebanon. This operation is intensifying, and obviously without complete ceasefire in this area, the Iranians will never accept any proposal from the United States of America. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.